Hello, this is Why U.S. Literature Through a Multicultural Lens. This will introduce some of the terms and basic concepts for English 2004 multi-ethnic U.S. literature. So first, I just want to begin with the fundamental questions of all my literature courses, and that is, what is America and who or what is an American? So think about how you might answer these questions. And your answers to these questions might change over the course of the class. So first, we're going to look at some responses from early American writers, beginning with Hector St. John de Crèvecoeur, who wrote a well-known book called Notes from an American Farmer. And he was a French writer who spent some time in the colonies during and just after the Revolution. And letter 3, What is an American, is his most anthologized letter. So this quotation, as you look at it, you look at how Crèvecoeur is defining America. And so we can see even in 1782 that America and American is an idea as much as it is a place or a person. And in this definition, he identifies the American as European or the descendant of a European. And so he also repeats the word new. So putting this emphasis on the American as new, as apart from Europe, and this makes sense given the context of the letter, that the colonies are breaking away from Europe, they're breaking away from Britain, and the last part, beginning from involuntary idleness, service dependence, penury, and useless labor, he's referring to the system of serfdom in which many of the people who came to the colonies were not of the landed class. They were of the servant class. But in the colonies, they can become a new person. Then we move on to a few quotations from the 19th century, and we start to see the definitions change a little bit. First, Herman Melville gives us a definition and says that America was settled by peoples of all nations. So, and he also says that we are not a narrow tribe. So he's beginning to hint at the pluralism or the vastness of America's diversity. And then in this last quotation, Walt Whitman, in his preface to Leaves of Grass, is giving a very large definition of the United States and its inhabitants. Walt Whitman is also celebrating the United States as poetic, that it is a country that is so vast and so diverse, that it is not a nation, but a teeming nation of nations, that it is made up of different peoples and regions and landscapes. So then we move on to some important passages that come from the 20th century. And these are from essays that I have provided links for. And the first is from an essay written by Randolph Bourne during World War I. He was a Jewish immigrant, and he is going against the idea of a melting pot. I encourage you to read the whole essay if you have the time. But he is proposing this idea of its transnationality, of an American identity that incorporates not only this idea of America and American, but also the cultures from which the immigrant has come. And that is what makes America, or could make America, great. That it is not merely a nationality, but a transnationality, so that you may come from Jewish Bohemia, and that is as much a part of your culture as American culture. And Randolph Bourne is arguing against the idea of a melting pot. And if you think about a melting pot melts together all the ingredients until it's one. And so it leaves out much of the diversity. Now, the second quotation is from a very important critical article by the scholar Gregory Jay. And his article is about how we should change the teaching of American literature, how we should represent the literary history of the United States, and that it shouldn't be about this idea of the American and his dream, but as he said, of how so many different cultural groups have interacted from the nation's beginning and continuing. And if we did that, then we'd see that America's literary history has, as he says, many protagonists, wearing many faces, speaking many languages, recalling divergent history, focused around contestation or competing conversations rather than unity. And what Jay is suggesting, and what others suggest, is that American literature has always been multicultural, it has always been diverse, it just hasn't been presented that way, and really until the 90s. So then we move on to some key passages from the readings that I gave to you. So the first is from the introduction to Jennifer Gillen's anthology of contemporary multicultural poetry. And so I've chosen 3 quotations that I thought were particularly striking, and you may have ones that appealed to you as well. But these, I think, really get to the heart of what this course is about. So this first quotation recalls the one we just looked at with Gregory Jay, and it's challenging this idea of the official narrative of United States history and its settlement as really sort of a peaceful one, or that, the Pilgrims land at Plymouth Rock, we celebrate Thanksgiving with the Indians, and then everything just sort of moves along from there. But as Gillen points out, that this is a nostalgic version of the United States, and it ignores what else happened, that the settlement of this country by Europeans, generally white Europeans, often ignores the oppression that happened to other people, including Native people, the enslavement of Africans and African Americans, the exclusion of Chinese Americans, the internments of Japanese Americans. We can look now at the treatment of Muslim Americans, the economic exploitation of migrant workers. We can think about how people of Latin or Latino descent or immigrants are treated. So as I put this emphasis on one quote, the official version of the settlement of America and its national character leaves out these severe and often violent aspects of what stabilizing the national identity entailed. So we need to think about, well, what is our national character? What is our national identity? And is it singular or is it many things? So then the next passage I want to look at introduces some terms that I want us to focus on in the class. And those terms are boundaries and borders. And we can think of boundaries and borders as not only geographical, but also cultural borders, linguistic borders, racial, ethnic borders. So as Gillen points out, she and her other editor chose these poems that address the instability of American identity and confront the prevalence of cultural conflict and exchange within the United States. So this is to show that one thing that's really unique about the United States is that it's always in the process of becoming. And that if we look at the foundational ideals in the Declaration of Independence, which is just really part of the story, that America or the land exists long before that, but that instead of privileging a really nice, harmonious narrative, that we need to look at the United States and the idea of America and American identity as something that's always going on. And so that it's always, we have this constant erecting, blurring, breaking, clarifying, and crossing of boundaries. So that people are crossing national boundaries, cultural boundaries. And that crossing these boundaries is a consequence of the complex intersections among people, culture, and languages within national borders, which themselves are revised constantly. So we have people are crossing boundaries, and then we're also looking at borders, and that our national borders change all the time, or they're always in flux. So for instance, right now, the border between the United States and Mexico is one that's fairly permeable, and it's a border that people cross all the time. So then the last quotation from Gillen is also important for terms that we will be looking at, and these are the terms other and otherness. So here she's looking at, well, that usually how we figure out is whether someone's American or American enough is looking at certain yardsticks like skin color, language, ethnicity, and religion. And so if we use those 4 yardsticks, then people who are generally not white, which is what's talked about in the NPR intro podcast to Code Switch, that people who generally don't move, who don't fit in with whiteness, although I would argue with this author that Italians have been sort of welcomed into this idea. But generally people whose skin color is not white, whose physical features do not seem to match up, who speak different languages, who are American Indians, who seem to go against what we've come to define as American, are seen as other than American. So most of the writers that we'll be reading during this course internalize these monolithic representations of Americanness. Think of Norman Rockwell paintings. But then they also recognize their otherness, that others are seeing them as other. And so sometimes this idea of other or otherness is also talked about as a kind of double consciousness, that you have a sense of yourself as who you are, but you also know that it's other than how Americanness is perceived. So then we go to the last quotation from, or now we move on to Catherine West and her essay on American multicultural identity. And these quotations really fall in line with what Jennifer Gillen was talking about, as well as Gregory J. And this is looking against the sense of identity. First, that American identity is really the theme of American, not only of American literature, but of American history and American culture, that we've always suffered from a kind of identity crisis, this search or quest for identity. And so what's really good is identity is complicated. It's, or as West points out, it's multiplicitous. It comes from both internal forces and external forces. And so we define ourselves in terms of how others see us, how we want them to see us, and how we perceive ourselves. And then she lists several factors that contribute to a sense of identity, and how much or how little each of these factor in really depends on the individual. But each of the authors that we are looking at will explore these components in different ways. So the next set of quotations from Catherine West, she has a section in her article, which you probably noticed, where she focuses on identity and American history, and that in order for us to engage or understand multicultural literature, we have to also understand the history of this nation. And so she also points out that multiculturalism is not new. It's not a fact of just the 19th and 20th century. It's something that has always been part of the land that we call America and the people that have settled it. So if you go back to that article, she will point out to you how many hundreds of tribes there were, and the many languages that were spoken. She also points out there's some historians think there are as many as 200 million peoples inhabiting North America before the arrival of Europeans, which is really quite staggering. So now one of the next terms that's going to be very important, especially for the reading in week 2 and continuing, is this idea of code switching. So authors of multicultural identity play with this. They play with the structure of their writing. They may play with style. They may use vignettes, photographs, drawings. You'll see that when we read The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. They may play with conventions of genres. So for instance, Sherman Alexie's poem Vision 2 is a prose poem, but he's also using code switching to a certain extent. So code switching is the inclusion of words from languages other than English without translating them. And so we will see that. And so when authors do this and they use this code switching, it's to show how their identity is bilingual. It also conveys probably a sense of the in-betweenness of their American identity. It could also show that they have a hybrid identity. It also may show how they're struggling with what it means to be American. That for them being American means they also cannot leave the language and culture of a country they've left behind. All right, so we've reviewed some of the key terms. Assimilation is one that you're probably already familiar with, and assimilation is the process by which immigrants become American. And usually what that means, and it's closely associated with melting pot, is that the immigrant, in order to become American, is expected to give up their language, their cultural traditions, and this could be even things like food, music, expressions, dress. And we'll see with writers the extent to which they resist assimilation, or if they don't, the cost associated with that. We've already looked at some definitions of other and otherness, of borders and boundaries, and of identity, including code switching and hybridity. You will learn about liminality and liminal in week 2, and I've included a definition for it in the Explore section. So now just a review of 2 poems which I thought we could use to see how some of these terms apply. So this poem, I Too, by Langston Hughes, was published in 1926. And if you look at the first line and the last line, I too sing America. I too am America. And that's a speaker really demanding that he be included as part of the definition of America. And that his poetry, his identity, his language is American, and as much American as that of white people. He'll begin, he says, I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh well and eat well and grow strong. So part of this is referring to the history of segregation of Black people in the United States. And he's also pointedly using this phrase, I am the darker brother. I'm the darker brother, the one that you've been ashamed of, the one that you've tried to shunt off into the other room so that other people, you can pretend I'm not there. But this speaker is saying, you can do that, but I'm working hard, I'm becoming strong, and someday soon, I will not be in the kitchen. And not only will you not tell me to eat in the kitchen, you won't dare to. And then, not only that, but you'll see how beautiful he is, and how beautiful a part of the American fabric he is, and will be ashamed. So this is one where he's really calling upon identity, and he's really calling out readers on their penchant for othering, or making the darker brother feel like an other. And he's saying, I'm not other, I am also American. And the more recent poem is one, All American Girl, published in 2001 by Julia Alvarez, who is a Dominican American poet. And All American Girl is from a collection of poems. And many of them address or have a speaker that's, again, sort of her conflict of being American and Dominican, and figuring out how to bring those two together, and often feeling sort of in between. So this poem is in 3 stanzas, and we see even in this first stanza, Alvarez is using code switching. So she's looking at English words like grimace, leer, disgust, and disdain. And she says, these are feelings I had yet to feel in English. So this is also pointing out how language says a lot about identity and how you even feel. And so sure, she wants to look like an American girl. She wants to sound like an American girl. This means that she doesn't have an accent. She wears store-bought clothes and makeup. And she also is code switching when she looks at words at tristeza. Would tristeza even feel the same as sadness? Would pity look as soulful as piedad? So here is a speaker who's feeling in between, who also has internalized a sense of what it means to be American, and she's also experiencing anxiety because right now she is other, because she doesn't feel like she looks or sounds American. And in this second stanza, she wonders if she could even be an authentic self in a borrowed tongue by speaking English. And again, she's using code switching. If cortesia would be misunderstood as brown nosing, or cries of alegria translate as terror. So she practices foreign faces, Anglo grins, repressing a native Latin fluency for the cooler mask of English ironies. And so here she's trying to practice to be someone else. And the foreign faces this time are faces that she would make that are not native to her Dominican heritage or her Dominican identity. And at this point, in order for her to become American the way she sees it, she has to repress her native Latin fluency. And we see in the last 2 lines what she really wants here. She wants the word and words to match again, as when I had lived solely in Spanish. So that language is such an inextricable part of who she is. And right now she's feeling in between. She's feeling this kind of double consciousness, this otherness with trying to speak English. And then in this third stanza, this final stanza, she comes to a resolution where she resolves then what is an all-American girl. So my face wouldn't obey. So she said, long after I'd lost my heavy accent, my face showed I had come from somewhere else. I couldn't keep the southern continent out of the northern vista of my eyes. I couldn't look like anybody else but who I was, an all-American girl. So we see she comes back to this phrase, all-American girl, which was in the first stanza. But by this time, she has redefined it, and she's figured out that her identity, she can speak English and she can speak Spanish, but her face shows that she's from somewhere else. She looks different, but she decides that she is an all-American girl, just for who she is, that she's in the United States, that she incorporates all these different aspects of her identity, and it's actually that makes her an all-American girl. So anyway, I hope that this presentation helps you understand some of the terms we'll be looking at this semester, and feel free to talk to me at any time about them. Thank you.